Here's Gather's interview with writer and director Robert Machoian, where we take a deeper dive into how he wrote and directed his movies, the integrity of Joseph Chambers, and the killing of two lovers. Hope you enjoy. So I wanted the first thing I wanted to ask you was, what was your filmmaker moment? As in, a lot of people ask, what was the movie that made you want to become a filmmaker? But I guess I'm asking, was there any event in your life, movie in your life, person in your life that made you really know that you wanted to be a filmmaker and make movies for a living?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting experience. I had gotten married and I had my daughter Harper. She was maybe 3 years old, and I just was never very good in school. And so I had lived in LA for a little while and tried to go to a junior college and just did really horrible at it. And so I was working for a dry ice company. It was a job I enjoyed, but the physical, we lifted about 14,000 pounds a day of dry ice. And so a guy that I worked with in his 50s, he had so much cartilage built up in his wrists, he couldn't move his wrists anymore. And so I was kind of aware that there was a time, as much as I enjoyed the job, there was a time limit on that. My wife Rebecca says, would argue otherwise, whether I actually enjoyed the job or not, based off my temperament. But anyways, the point being is I needed to figure out, like, I was making $15 an hour. I knew I didn't, that wasn't sustainable long term. I then went over to Jamba Juice and was like a manager at Jamba Juice, and they didn't pay well enough either. It was almost just a shift out of like the physical labor into like the food industry.
Yeah, the food industry doesn't have very good pay typically either, right?
No, and the contracts are 50-hour week contracts, even if you're on salary, so they anticipate you working a lot. Anyways, point being is when I had Harper, and I actually made this documentary on her. I bought in this little VH or H, not even HD, HDV cam thing, and I made this little documentary on her being 3 years old. And that documentary, I stayed up every night editing it. It's about 10 minutes, and it took me like 2 weeks to make it. And when that ended, when I finished it, I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to get through college. And and immediately, because I'd gone back to that dry ice company after managing Jamba Juices, and immediately just like I ended that job, enrolled in junior college, and it was this process of just like I was taking like 22 units per semester to get into where I eventually went, which was Cal State Monterey Bay. And it was like that, weirdly, that it was like the making of that film was like I could do this. And even while I was through school, I was like, the objective was to get through college. I was like, I'll get a BA and then I'll work it out from there. And so anyways, I get all the way through college. Now I'm trying to figure out, now I have 3 kids and I'm like, I don't know if you could be a filmmaker, And I made another film with Harper. She was now 7, and it was called Ella and the Astronaut. It was the short that I made right after school. And that film got into the BFI London Film Festival, and that was the film that was like, oh, okay, I make good work. I should pursue this longer. If I hadn't made both those movies, I don't know what I'd be doing. Probably driving long haul truck, to be honest.
Wow. So how old were you when you made that first documentary?
I think I was 25 years old I was 24. I think 24 when I made that, because I graduated from college when I think I was 28.
Okay, got it.
So yeah. So
That's cool. That's a very different story than a lot of people. Why they start making films. Um, so I wanted to ask, you have a really distinct style to your movies. Like I'm 100% sure that if I saw your next movie, unless you shot it in some way that was completely different than your last two films, I would be able to tell that you directed it.
Hmm.
And how did you form this style, and how would you describe it? And are there any filmmakers or movies that inspired it? Oh, you there? Hello? Oh, sorry. I think you broke up there for a sec.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you froze for a minute. You said, how did I develop the style? And
Yeah, and is there a way that you would describe your style, and which filmmakers or movies inspired it, if any?
yeah, I mean, I started out like the first kind of 5 years of making films. I made a lot. I've worked with for about 10 years. I've worked with the collaborator Rodrigo Hedebeck, and we still work together. But um, the shorts were all handheld, and it was really like I was really inspired by the Dardenne brothers, but even more specifically, Lodge Kerrigan, who made this movie called Keen, which they're doing a 4K restoration this, like they announced it like last week, which is really exciting for me. Um, and it was the type of character driven storytelling that I was really drawn to, because it requires so much empathy as opposed to like other type of genres or ways of storytelling where there's multiple characters and maybe even the filmmaker keeps you as a distance. And then that year that we made Ellen the Astronaut, this is 2008, was the same year that Kelly Reichardt made Wendy and Lucy. And we saw that at the Austin Film Festival. And Wendy and Lucy had a massive impact on me because it went from Lodge Kerrigan doing these handheld and really like calculated camera work and camera movement. And I shoot most of the collaborative stuff that Rodrigo and I do together. So I was really thinking a lot about the dance between the actor and the camera and how that, like, if you back away and you move in, what those things say. And we shot everything handheld. And then Wendy and Lucy was on sticks for the most part, or dolly. And between her work and Gus Van Sant's kind of angst trilogy with like Elephant and Jerry, and I'm missing Last Days, both of them like really informed like, okay, there's more control that can be had with the camera. And also what both of those films have is resting a lot of the storytelling on performance, like that the actors that I feel like both Keen and Wendy and Lucy demand the actors to be like at their best. And that was really informative to me because I mean, I think other, if you take the Ocean films, for example, all really great actors, all bringing, their A game as well. But there's ways in which if the movie wasn't working, Soderbergh could like cut around and make sure it worked in the
Yeah.
story narrative. I don't know for a fact, but I would bet real money that like there's an editing process that also saves the movie. And I was really taken by how Wendy and Lucy really, or Kelly Reichardt in general, she takes a lot of risks in the way in which she films and tells her stories. So those really informed it. And so the earlier films that I did with Rodrigo, some of them are testing like duration, and I like slow cinema in general. I wanted to figure out like how could I use duration, but then also not be trying to challenge the audience's ability. Like sometimes when they hold a shot for 2-3 minutes, but you're bored because nothing's really
Yeah. Yeah.
happening. I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to figure out how to like, I like duration. I like allowing the actors to like really have to push their performances, but I don't ever want somebody watching my film being like, what a dick. He just held the thing for like so long, and I have no reason why I gained nothing in the process of that hold. So it's really been like over the last 3-4 years trying to craft like how can that work? How can these longer takes and I wouldn't say my films are commercial at all, but how they can play into major audiences. So I'm not just like making films for like cinema lovers only.
And does the tactic of keeping the audience engaged in those long shots, like there's some shots in The Integrity of Joseph Chambers and The Killing of Two Lovers that are kind of far away and people are talking and they're held there for a minute, but they keep you engaged. Is the way that you believe that you keep the audience engaged, is it through the writing, or is it through the cinematography, or directing the actors, or is it kind of a combination of all of them?
It's a bit of a combination. It starts in the writing. Because I think a lot about the dialogue arcs or the arcs of the scene. Like, when I was in undergrad, the directing professor would always talk about the beginning, middle, end of each scene. And at the time, I didn't really understand it because I'm watching films like and I'm trying, like if we took Sicario, for example, and you're like, okay, well, where's the beginning, middle, end? It's certain scenes are transitional. And he never talked about the transitional scenes, like, so he only talked about the beginning, middle, end. So I always approached it that way. So in the writing process, that's what I think about. What is the beginning, middle, and end of each scene? And if I'm trying to keep something longer, if I know it's going to be, say a minute and a half, I start to think about it from a musical context, like the writing of a song, and it's not just the beginning, middle, end of a scene. But if you listen to like techno and house music, it's just like that same beat that's hitting. You're like, okay, some people love that stuff, so I don't want to discredit it. But the
Yeah,
average person,
I'm not a big fan of that
yeah,
myself.
in time, you're like, you can take about a minute, and then you're like, dude, what the heck? And you
Yeah.
even I think Saturday Night Live or somebody did sketches where they're like waiting for the transitional shift, and it keeps going and not happening. It's really fun. Hilarious. I think about it more in the like, okay, if you're writing like pop music, you have the verse that can go a certain point. You can have a bridge, and then you have to have, what the chorus is. And so I kind of write it that way, where I'm trying to like build up, build down. Like the great example is in The Killing of Two Lovers, knowing that I wanted the argument, at the climactic part of the scene to go as long as it did. I need David to like go through so many different transitions where he's being compassionate, where he's being self-pity, where he's way out of line, and all those things have to happen throughout. And I really want to force the audience to be there so that they're not able to look away. Like if I'm aware that like if an audience member was ever involved in being in the room when their parents were arguing, they were going to feel that same trapped. Like, I just want to leave and I can't leave, because editing really does at times allow a release of tension, because you've moved to a new camera angle. You're like, what are we looking at now? What things am I seeing? Now there's a tree over there. Now there's, so it's new information that allows for an escape.
So you're kind of like forcing the audience to be stuck with the characters and the situation that they're in.
Yeah, so if we take Joseph Chambers, it's like one of the things that was critical to be held long was one where he's like loading this gun and he does not know what he's doing, and he's dropping ammo and he's being very careless. And it's like important for everyone to be like, oh my gosh, this guy, like everything he's doing is making me uncomfortable. Even if you don't know weapons, you can still be like, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
like staying in that scene, and the actor really building the arc of like, I'm taking the gun out, I feel really cool, and then I'm trying to load it and I don't know how to load it, and I'm dropping ammo. It's like all those are kind of like timed beats to think about, so that the scene again isn't like, I'm just watching a guy load a weapon for the sake of loading a weapon. I think there's a really exciting element, and I'm seeing a lot of filmmakers. I mean, what's exciting for me is I'm not isolated. A lot of cinema now is like starting to slow down. Like Ozark has, while it still cuts, they slow the cut ratio down. And even I'm watching that show Old Man, and that cut ratio is also like a lot slower. So I think I think it's part of this kind of evolution to like maybe start using the other tools of cinema, like sound and performance, more than I think they've been used in like the 80s and 90s and even early like 2000s.
Yeah. And you know, regarding the integrity of the integrity of Joseph Chambers, what was the conception of the movie? Like, what inspired you to make this kind of story, or curious to dive into a circumstance like this one?
Yeah, I was living at Davis. Davis is where I did California is where I did my graduate work, and then I just
Uh,
stayed there for about 7 years. I was adjunct teaching, kind of working up, and then I got a job offer here in Utah and took it. And Utah is like really an interesting state. Um, Lots of like fear of the end of the world, like the big you feel this energy that like at some point Jesus may be returning, in the next year. I mean, I've
uh,
been here for 6 years and you feel it. I mean,
uh,
you're like, oh, next year. Oh, I mean, nobody's saying he's going to be here next year, but there's just this like the end at some point is going to come. The result of that is that most of the people here have a year to 2 years supply of food in their basements. And in the rural communities, a lot of people are even further. They are preppers. And it's kind of wild to know, like, if the United States, like, if the United States did actually crumble, I have a lot of confidence that Utah would be okay based off of like the
mm,
social structures. So the result of that is me being an outsider, not gun owner. Everyone in my community, for the most part, even if they're not gun people, most of them own weapons. They have like for safety, even if they never use it. And so I was like, I'm moving in this culture I know really very little about. I have some family here, and then I'm trying to understand them and get to know them. And met people that literally they're like, I could walk outside and survive for months, in the woods. And so I
mm,
started to interview people. A friend of mine lives in this town called Fairview, which is about 1,200 people. And I went out and I met a sheriff out there and interviewed him. And it really, the big kernel of the integrity of Chambers started with me being like, oh, maybe I should learn how to do this stuff. And then being also like, I really have no business. It's not really my culture. I'm
yeah.
gonna make this big cultural shift where I become like I mean, I was a vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for like 15 years, and then I've been a vegetarian again now for 4 years. It's like I'm really hunting's gonna be the thing. You know, it was so, and that was just like, and it was an analyzation of like, why am I feeling these things? Like,
uh,
what is it that's
uh,
making me feel like, oh, I should become a hunter and we should become self-reliant and like, because in all the research I did, the real answer is like the only way we'd ever survive a type of apocalypse is via community. But like the community has to band together. And I researched and have found some communities where like somebody grew or were raising sheep, another person was raising bees, guy down the street was growing apples. So the case of apocalypse, they would band together and could share resources and survive. That's like
uh,
really how we will survive. But the prepper mentality is individual. It's like me, my family, and we are going to survive it. They own weapons under the idea of not necessarily hunting, but if I have to kill people who come towards my property. So I really was like, it's a very interesting mindset, and that sparked kind of the writing of it.
yeah, and the film has a lot to do, like kind of like what you just said, like how you're thinking of why you're feeling pressured to kind of engage in these new cultural activities. And the film, I think, has a lot to do with masculinity,
Yeah.
um, and I think the lengths that men will go to prove, not even really to other people, because in the integrity of Joseph Chambers, it's almost like everyone else doesn't really care about Joseph Chambers doing this stuff. Everyone's kind of like, why are you doing this? You're not ready for it. And he's the one that keeps insisting, no, 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 I'm fine. I want to do this. I want to do this. And Joseph's struggle in sort of being able to overcome that desire to be masculine in a way was what made the movie really beautiful to me. And what does the ending say about what you think is admirable for a man or anyone really to do, and how you think of masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, what I found is really interesting. Again, moving here to Utah, they're I mean, very masculine men here because of this kind of prepper idea and the self-reliant idea. You meet a lot of individuals, specifically in Kanash, where we shot The Killing of Two Lovers. I met a lot of men that like they work because of there's no resources there. They know how to work on their cars. They know how to, they do know how to, gut and clean animals. They know how to basically repair everything in their homes. So I was meeting these very, what I think are termed masculine ideas, right? Women know how to work on cars and fix houses as well, but we've kind of given those terminologies masculinity. Then at the same time of that, there was this discussion of toxic masculinity that's been a very kind of important discussion. And I was like, okay, I'm meeting these men who have masculine traits, but if you talk to them about their children, they will openly cry. Like they have no shame in crying about how much they love their children. And that was very interesting. I was like, oh, this is like, they're very proud fathers, which really motivated The Killing of Two Lovers. And then with The Integrity of Joseph Chambers, I was like, okay, well, what is this discussion about toxic masculinity? And the more I began to explore it, the more I was like, nobody actually is asking for it. It's like it's the thing that's like, I'm tough. I could beat the crap out of you. I will, if I need to, stand up and do that. And really, at the end of the day, nobody's asking. And I like the discussion that's been circulating since the Oscars, right? Nobody asked Will Smith to do that. He didn't. Everyone, he could have stood up and said, Chris, I can beat the living, I can and will beat the living crap out of you. And the whole audience would have been like, we all know that. You're gigantic. Chris is small. Like, it's like no one asks for it. And that's what I started to understand. I was like, toxic masculinity is this thing that nobody's asking for, but many men think it's necessary or that it's wanted, like this, and you see men doing that in these ways of like fighting in general is like such an unnecessary tool unless you're in a dangerous like situation. So for me, I really wanted to explore that. I was like, okay, Joseph's going to go do this thing that he believes is masculine. There's not really any, I don't find things wrong with hunting because I know a lot of families that like they'll kill an elk or deer at the beginning of the season and they eat it. So even as a vegetarian, I'm like, I actually support that more than like what's, going
like to factory farming or something.
Yeah, factory farming.
Yeah.
100%. So I'm like, man, a friend of mine here bow hunts. I mean, he even takes it the next level. He thinks it's more respectable to bow hunt than it is to use a gun. And so I don't have an issue with that, but a lot of masculinity is attached to that. Like I can go provide for my family. That's kind of the root of masculinity. So the toxic aspect to me that I really wanted to explore was this: no one's asking you to do this. I mean, even though his friend who lends him the guns, like, dude, maybe I can go next weekend. It's like, I go this weekend, but next weekend he's like, no, I'm going to do it. It's like no one's encouraging it. And then the result of kind of the film is watching this, like, again, person is doing something he should not be doing. And then you watch the acts of selfishness. I mean, it's just the rest of the movie as we watch is self-serving, which toxic masculinity really is very self-serving. It's thought about himself. A friend of mine, for example, told me the story at a party where this guy was telling this woman about this book he was reading and all the really profound ideas in the book. And he was telling her, and he kept being like, and then there's this and this, and he went on and on for like 40 minutes. And she wrote the book. He literally just never gave her a moment to be like, I actually wrote that book. And I was like, oh my gosh. If you had just get, and that's very selfish and self-serving, right? It's like, I'm going to tell you profound things that I've read.
So he was saying that he read the book, but he had actually written the book.
No. Right? He was telling this woman everything he had learned in this book.
Oh, so it sounds like he's reading it, but it's really, he wrote it.
No,
right?
no, 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 no. She wrote the book.
Oh, she wrote the book. Oh, she wrote the book. So he's kind of just kissing her butt, I guess.
No, he didn't know she wrote it.
Oh,
That's
so
the
she
point,
just. Oh, so she just was. Oh, I got it. I got it. Got it.
right?
Okay.
He's like, hey, I read this really great book. Goes on and on and on about this great book he read. Never lets her get in a word about the book. He's like all these profound ideas, and at the end, she's like, yeah, I wrote the book. So you can imagine being like, it was a philosophical book. So you can imagine he's telling her all these really smart things that really, in the end of the day, was what she had written. So there was this, like, the point being is how self-serving he was to, like, I'm gonna dole this information on to this woman and make her smarter because I have shared this information. The result is she is, knows more about that than he does. And so I thought about that idea as well, and how much Joseph really is serving himself through all of the actions. That began to be really important to me, because that's really a lot of what's toxic about aspects of masculinity, is the self-serving element. I mean, even the end of the film, to me anyways, the choice that he makes is for himself, right? At the end
Yeah.
of the day, it's what we've deemed the right thing to do, but it's most often when people, when someone comes to apologize to you for something they've done wrong, they
It's to
really
make
are,
themselves feel better, right?
they need to get what's on their chest off of it. I mean, the apology in many ways can help the other person as well. So I don't want to diminish that there is this element. But if you took an affair, for example, and you slept with, someone else's partner, then you knowingly, and then later you came and apologized, it's really benefits you very little, because you now feel better about your actions, because you feel you've forgiven and you were able to do the action,
Yeah.
and the other person really can just be like, it's just a little bit in them trying to let it go. Like, I
Yeah.
can't stew on it. I don't want to stew on it anymore, because they feel forgiven, or they feel that the burden's been lifted off their shoulders. So if I continue to stew at it, it's to my own peril. And so what I've said as it relates to the ending of Joseph Smith, or not Joseph Chambers, somebody asked me, like, well, what happens after? And I was like, well, we have an idea of what understands after, but what's most important to understand is whatever narrative he shares, it's his narrative, and it will serve him in the best way possible.
So it'll still be selfish in a way after. Yeah, the moment that really for me captured that, even though it appears altruistic in a way that it's like, okay, I'm holding myself accountable for what I did, that it was for him, is that he kind of has this, there's that vision that he has, right? Where
Yeah.
you think that he makes the other decision to bury the body, to go home. And he just knows that it's going to be eating away at him to be hiding that. And that's what makes him go, okay, fine. I'm going to be honest. So it's still
Yeah.
self-serving in that way. Right.
100% self-serving. I mean, what would have, if he was really concerned about his family, which is how he perceives that vision, it's like, I won't be able to be the person I am. He would have left everything in the woods, because that would be better for his. I mean, for now they have to live with, like, his wife has to live with his actions, his kids. If they stay in the town, he has to deal with the community's perception of him after that. I mean, there's a lot, but sometimes doing what we deem, quote unquote, the right thing is very self-serving.
Yeah, absolutely. And unless I'm describing it incorrectly, I think that the integrity of Joseph Chambers is kind of a character study. But unlike a lot of other character studies, they get deep into the psyche or the backstory of the character. In this film, Joseph Chambers, who he is, it's completely revealed through the decisions that he makes during the course of the story. And I would kind of say it's a pretty similar thing for the killing of two lovers. And one thing that I found interesting in Joseph Chambers that made him feel a lot more real was that his decisions sometimes they were contradictory on the surface level, but underneath it all, they're self-serving. But you know, like there's parts where you think, oh, he's gonna go do the right thing, and he's gonna go tell everyone to have, and then he's like, oh no, I'm actually gonna bury the body, and then it's like, okay, now he's doing this, or oh, he's gonna bury the body, now he's trying to talk to the guy and apologize for shooting him, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these things that kind of contradict with each other to make it feel like such a real, almost like you're watching this real event unfolding. And when you're writing your characters, do you always find out who they are in the process of writing them in the script? Or do you have like backstories and other information that the audience isn't aware of to guide you as you write? Like Tarantino, I believe, does that, for example.
Yeah, normally they come through a series of like people that I meet that are I think are very, very interesting. In the process of meeting that person and getting to know them normally kind of sparks the beginning creation of a character. And then also, you know, there's always, from a writing standpoint, you're always coming from your own perspective as well. I mean, there's always an element, I think, in every film that a writer writes themselves, a bit of themselves. Like I am, you know, I was, the way that I was raised, my dad really, the masculinity he alluded or passed on to us was through like service. Like he's always the guy that will like help somebody in need all the time. And so I wasn't, even though I was raised in a hunting culture, we were not like a hunting family per se. So yeah, there are those elements. And then yeah, the writing process, I always joke because I enjoy the writing process, but I also feel like my kids play a lot of video games. And I can't remember which one it was. I think it was like Mario Brothers or something like that. And one of my kids had left to go do something. And I think it was Mario just sitting there and he's just kind of hanging out. And then after a minute, he was like he just put his hands up like, hey, where are you? You know, he looks like right at the screens like, hey. And I was like, oh, what? You know, and I was like, oh, the character's like acknowledging, like, are we playing this game or are we, you know, what? And I thought that was a really funny little thing, but it communicated very much like if I'm writing there are periods of time, like a couple of days I can't write. I feel like my character's like, hey, what's up? I'm like stuck in the last spot that you left me, you know. And through that process, I feel like I do get to, there begins to be a relationship between me and the character. And I feel like I don't know how much backstory Quentin Tarantino kind of puts together, but normally it's just feel like I spend time with them more, to where some actions in the writing process will be like that, I wouldn't do that. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And so it informs, like I go back and I'm like, that feels like very false. And so then I have to rewrite the scenes, and that feels motivated by the character. Like the more I get to know them, the more they actually start to dictate kind of the scenarios I put them in.
Okay, great. Yeah. Tarantino actually goes really overboard with it. Like, at least with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
I think he said that he created a list of like the different movies that the characters like, everything that they've went through since they're kid. It's pretty crazy. I personally don't do that. And I was wondering, what's your approach to writing dialogue? Because your dialogue is so engaging and full of conflict, but it feels more realistic than most movies. Like when I'm writing my own scripts, what helps me write dialogue is being extremely clear about the character's motivations. So what do they want? What's standing in the way of what they want? Is there any kind of preparation that you have going into the dialogue that kind of guides you in the right direction, or do you just kind of let it go as you're writing?
A little bit I let it go as I'm writing, but you know, the writing courses oftentimes, you know, they'll tell you, you know, that dialogue is like, you want to write dialogue the way people wish if they were actually in the event, that they really could say things.
Yeah,
you know?
like when you're in the car and you're like, oh man, I should have said that thing,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah. One of my favorite tattoos I've ever seen is it's like just a tattoo of a book this thick on a guy's arm, and it's like things I should have said, volume 8. You know, it's like, yeah, there's an element of that, but when I'm writing, I also want the elements of like to be grounded. I want it to be grounded in like how people really actually talk in many ways and not so polished. So when I'm writing, I am thinking about the nuances, but then I also want elements to exist that aren't necessarily always only pushing the story forward. So it's really like twofold. But when I go back to it, I always, sometimes we write stuff that's like, it's like too on the nose. So it's like, how can we, and sometimes I'll write that. I'm like, okay, I need it to, this scene needs to do this. So I'll write that. But then I'll backpedal it, and think about, for example, the beginning dialogue between Nikki and David in the beginning of the film. And it's like, he's just picking up the kids, but he's still trying to have this conversation that's ongoing. And it's like, when you're writing a film about a couple who's been already married for at least 17 years because of their oldest daughter, how you have to be careful about writing stuff that's not like for the audience specifically. And that can be really, really tricky. And it has to be these like little nuanced things where it's like, well, how, it's like, imagine when you walk into a conversation between friends and you're not saying anything, you're kind of like, okay, what are they talking about? And then you have to pick up on, oh, okay, they're talking about this thing. When I was writing Killing Two Lovers, that was constantly, because I'm like, David and Nikki are in the middle of things. They're not, beginning. So how in the world do I write those things? So the date night sequence specifically was like, I have to think about like, I need the audience to fall in love with the two of them, know why they've been married for so long and why there's value in saving that marriage, but also why they're also no longer together.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's very daunting. And in the earlier drafts, there were some that were too on the nose. There were things that I like, sometimes like Spike Lee will do this, right? In his films, he'll all of a sudden have a scene that the person turns toward the camera and just says all of this stuff directly to the camera. And I think about that when I'm writing, if at all it gets to the point where I'm like, well, the actor might as well turn to the audience like, since you don't know, you've been married for 17 years, and let me go on and on and on. And those are problems that I have to go back to and like really like figure out how to solve.
Yeah, and when you talk about how that like that tattoo, the things I should have said, volume 8 or whatever,
Yeah.
there is a lot of that in the scripts, but there's also parts that feel so unlike that, at least to me, like in The Killing of Two Lovers, the scene where David is arguing with Derek at the end, and he's getting really unglued and he's completely out of control. It seems like he's trying so hard to be in control, right? He wants to get his kids in the truck. He wants to emasculate Derek because Derek's kind of emasculated him by being with his wife. And it's just completely not working. And he's kind of making a fool of himself. And then to top it off, I won't go into it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone that hasn't seen it, but great movie. And when you're directing the dialogue, how closely do you make the actors follow the script? Because there's some specific scenes, like in The Integrity of Joseph Chambers. What comes to mind is the scene between the man that he shoots and him when he's really apologizing profusely. And then there's a lot of scenes between the kids, or a couple of scenes between the kids and David and the Killing of Two Lovers that feel so real. Like it almost felt like you were just recording people talking. Like I felt like did he really write this, because it feels so real. And is a lot of that improv and telling the actors to kind of do what they want, or are they really following it from the script, like almost word for word?
They for the most part are following it word for word. It's a kind of a mix of it's a mix of both, in the sense of it's written in the script, and the beats are all there, and there's specific things that need to be said. There are really important things kind of throughout that need to be said. That saying that, if I'm going to do like a 4 to 5 to 6 minute take, I have to give like the actors leeway, because to if I at any point, like we say we did a take, then the argument in the integrity of Joseph Chambers or Killing Two Lovers, for example, and I walked up to any of the actors and was like, that was really great, but you missed the line where you say, they'll be like, oh, what the hell? Like, what are we doing here? Right? They'd be like, very much like, what are we doing here? Okay, maybe we shouldn't do this in a long take. Maybe we need to start beating it out, because if you need me to say exactly every single word that is said here, then we need to not try and do this in this like longer performative thing, because their objective is not word for word. Their objective is, I read the script, I know the dialogue that you wrote, but my obligation is to keep the emotional tension building and boiling in the proper beats and tones. It would be the same thing if you were watching a rock band and somebody missed a part of a lead, and they was like, well, on the album you're playing, you go to this note and you didn't go to that. It's like, dude, did you feel it though? And it's like, yeah, I felt it. And so they are keeping the script, but I would never comfortably ever go up and like critique. That said, there are specific things that need to be said, and we pre-discuss that. Mikey knew like some really important things to say were the like, so how are you going to preserve all that meat? Like, is the refrigerator running in this like this imaginative scenario that you've created for yourself? Because Joseph has very much only thought about one thing, right? It's the killing of the animal. It's not the like, how do we sustain long term? And then the mockery of like, did you pick those clothes out yourself, or did your mommy pick it out for you? That was like really important. And then this idea of being killed by a phony, the fact that like, and the being killed by a phony is a small character trait for Lone Wolf, in the sense of like, he went out in the woods to kind of escape stupid people, and as a result was killed by a stupid person,
Yeah.
and that builds really to the end of his storyline. Obviously is really brief. It'd be really cool to have made like another film that explored him. But at the end of his kind of dialogue to Joseph, he says really like, there's no point to this. And it's because I'm like, that's what he's discovering out. He's like, because really with a lot of these preppers, I'm like, what is the point of survival? If society crumbles and it's just you by yourself, there have been enough studies that have proven like mankind is not built to be alone. Quickly, people go insane. I mean, surprisingly, within months of isolation, you start to go insane. So it's like, that was like, those were important things for Lone Wolf for me, because I was like, all right, Mikey, we don't know you, man. Like, we're going to know you through what's in your camp and this one real scene that the two of you get to have. And so I need these kind of beats. And then he knew that. So then there was room within there. If for some reason he forgot lines, he was like, well, he knew those things were critical and could leave it at that. So, and that's kind of how I work. I really want the actors to encompass the character enough that if they go off script, they still know what that person would say.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. It's kind of like, it sounds similar. I mean, obviously it's probably a lot more scripted than this, but what Curb Your Enthusiasm does, Larry David, they write the script and they have specific beats that they need to hit in each scene, but then the rest of it is left to improv. Obviously, it's not that free range, right? But
it's not that free range. I would say it's a little bit more. Somebody I pull a lot of influence from is Mike Lee as well, because I would love to work how he works, which is like, he just like describes the scenario, tells the actors who the characters are, and then they go build the backstories and they build the characters and they build their dialogue. And then they do a lot of rehearsal from that point. So if you see like Naked, for example, which is a really powerful film, and that main actor has like created that character. So again, he knows how the character would talk. It's always my hope with the actors. It's like I've written all the dialogue, and if an actor could say all the dialogue I wrote, awesome, that's amazing. But if at any scenario they end up like, okay, I forgot where this goes via specifically the dialogue, my hope is they like know that character enough that like to go where they go is like is David, or is in the context of Klain is, you know, Joseph or David, him knowing both of them well enough.
So yeah, so even if what they say isn't in the script, you hope that it's still true to the character, right? It might not be true to the script, but it's true to the character.
Yeah, because when you do longer takes, you really it's never going to be perfect. I mean, it
Yeah.
isn't. I don't know that it's possible in any scenario with long takes. Um, I've seen films where they really push proficiency, and it begins to feel really false and really orchestrated. It's like it's almost like too orchestrated. So then it's like, I mean, even Birdman, which I really love and think is really, really a beautiful, beautiful movie. Sometimes throughout that film, you can tell like it feels too perfect. It's like you stepped in, you know, it's like Zach Galifianakis steps in too right at the right time. That if like maybe if you know the whatever is Michael Keaton had been a couple steps ahead and Zach Galifianakis had to take the moment to catch up to him, that would have felt a little bit more real. But he comes and they collide together at the right exact time. I don't want that ever. So it's like and we don't do a lot of them. I mean, I think in Joseph Chambers, most of them were 1 to 3 takes.
Oh wow.
So it was a matter of like you just accept it as a director. You're like, oh dang it, they missed that line, and it was like such a good line, and they missed it. But what he said in the place of that has the same intention.
Okay,
And
got
you
it.
just have to do that. Otherwise, again, I mean, maybe someday I'll be, you know, David Fincher does a lot of takes, and even I was reading Sidney Lumet talking about he did 34 takes with Marlon Brando and A Fugitive Kind, and I'm like, that could be really cool. You know, maybe at some point to do that, but the actor would have to be like, I love everything that's written, and I really want to nail it. Let's do it together, and it be a collaborative thing, and not necessarily me being like, no, we're going to take 60. It's gonna, you know, because I want to, you know.
So you said that this film is the second movie in a trilogy of your films about humans in despair, right?
Yeah.
Can you describe the kind of despair that the characters experience in The Killing of Two Lovers and The Integrity of Joseph Chambers, and how they're connected or different from one another? And can you maybe give us a sneak peek of what kind of desperation will be in the final film of this trilogy?
Yeah. I mean, these are really I grew up in King City, this small town in the Salinas Valley of California, which is mainly middle class and poor. And the middle class and the poor are talked a lot about politically, but they're always either somebody thinks they're helping or saving them, or specifically now living in the Midwest, they think they're all like Trump voting Republicans that aren't very smart. And they talk a lot. It bothered me a lot. Not that I wanted Trump to be president, but they just talked about how uneducated his voting body were. They'd be like, well, they weren't educated, and most Democrats are educated and gone to college. And I've gone to college, I've gone to grad school. I do not like that dialogue. I know many people that are
it's very like elitist in a way, right?
It's very elitist. But through trying my own self to really kind of unpack that and not be an angry person, a lot of the people in these rural areas are their intentions are really good. Their hearts are in the right places. They're not fully informed in the sense of the advantage that they're being taken of. That's what happens like a lot. At the same time, they're trying to grow. They definitely are trying to go. I was down in Nephi last summer shooting a documentary, and like it was funny because they kept calling all the women like very like our beautiful women of Nephi and all, and it's like the intention was to be very kind, but a lot of the female crew that I had with me were just so annoyed that the thing they kept mentioning is just their beauty, you know. And I'm like, well, they're not like you're only beautiful. I mean, they kind of like you're beautiful, intelligent, but that's the thing that they kind of say, right? So I
Yeah.
got it. And I was like, well, but yeah, maybe they should just stop saying that, you know.
Uh-huh.
But then they had just started a female wrestling team, and this was during the Ute Stampede, which was last week. And they brought the 4 female wrestlers out, and they were like, we've just started this female wrestling team. We're so excited. Let's hear it for our women wrestlers. And I mean, it was 16,000 people in the stadium just cheering for these 4 women. And I was like, okay, progress is like slow, but it's happening. And these
Yeah.
and many of the people are very proud of these women who are now getting into wrestling. But it's also 2021, and Nephi just started having a female wrestling team. So there's these contradictions that are occurring. I wanted to explore this aspect of like these type of people trying to grow, but also this aspect of, so in Killing Two Lovers, David is trying to give his wife, they got married young, they have these children. He knows it's not appropriate to dominate her. He's trying to have this space, give her this space, but he's losing his mind because the space means he might end up without her. But he's growing. There's like, in another scenario, in a very toxic scenario, he may be like, hell no, you're not leaving me. You're not leaving the kids. We're staying together. And, you know, he handles Derek way before the movie even starts. We have no movie. In Joseph Chambers, we have this desperation of like Joseph trying to like fit into this culture that he doesn't really belong to, and nobody's really asking him to. But he's desperately afraid of like this end of days, which I was just recently in Paris, and it was the first time since I lived in Utah that I was like, oh, there's no feeling that the world's going to end in Paris. And I'm like, oh, they've lived through like multiple world wars. Paris has been decimated and rebuilt so many times, and the history is thousands of years, that they don't go around thinking like, well, the world's going to end next month. And there's that feeling. So David is desperate to be this, or Joseph is desperate to be this provider. In the film, if we get to make it, which good things are kind of happening, but this film that I've written called I Love You Now and Forever, it's really now I've taken these kind of 2 scenarios with married couples, but mainly male leads, because Klain was kind of willing to be in both those films. And now it's like a couple who are kind of stuck in a situation where they have to like figure out how to provide for their family. So it really is trying to get at these middle class ideas, that, you know, every time a political candidate runs, he runs on education, and then we vote them, and then they don't fund education. It's like there's this like optimism and belief that the middle class have, and the low and poor, there's this desire for a type of life that politicians and people in these positions of power promise that they never pay. They never like come through on. Like our education system in the United States is still awful. The healthcare system in the United States is still horrendous. And these are things that they run on. And so it's this voting class that really tries to be optimistic. And as a result, in each one of these scenarios, the characters are trying to take matters into their own hands.
Wow. Yeah, that's very beautiful. You're basically humanizing this population that has kind of been dehumanized a lot in the last couple of years, it seems like.
And it is the majority of the United States.
Yeah.
And as I traveled through, I try in the summers to kind of drive around the United States, and I get to know people as a result of being a filmmaker, but it also is for my own self to have more empathy and understanding. And I can say with a lot of confidence that there's middle ground in just basic conversations. Most of the people I meet that I think are very extremists, really there's very much middle ground. It's just creating the right dialogue. I speak a lot about Kanash because I love that area. but one of the stories I tell is like, there was a guy there when I was there that said like the sign of the devil is socialism. Like he fully believes that socialism is, when the Bible talks about the sign of the devil, it's socialism. Yet they have no law enforcement in Kanosh because the town handles it. There's no trash, like there's not a trash company. They just have a collective giant trash bin at the end of town that you take your trash to. And many of the time people in town take other people's trash if they can't, if they're old, if they need assistance. Then while I was there, a woman had returned from Salt Lake, gotten hooked on drugs. And the lady that we were trying to rent a home from put that woman up into another one of the homes she owned, was like, she can stay there as long as she can stay sober. She's welcome to stay there. And then the town would bring her food so that she didn't need, so that she could just get sober. And I'm like, you guys are 100% living socialism. But to say that would make them angry. I mean, I was like, you guys are the actually perfect example of socialism. And I even said like, so when the apocalypse comes, what happens for you guys? And they're like, there's only one road in and one road out. They're like, we block that and then we'll band together. And like, we have enough resources to survive an apocalypse. And I'm like, but saying the word socialism is to many the sign of the devil. And it's like, okay, well then I don't need to prove to them that they believe in socialism. I can just be like, what you guys are doing is amazing. Right?
Yeah.
Because it is amazing what they're doing. And I have found that, you know, I was in Nebraska working on a documentary, and it was about just small towns and how they remain optimistic and how they survive. But we would ask, like, do you guys really believe in automatic weapons? And most of them are like, no, I mean, we hunt to survive, but like, no one really needs an AR-15. And I was like, I agree, you know, but it was like, but I don't need to be like, oh, we believe in gun control. That's the thing. It's like, oh, I believe in gun control. And they'd be like, whoa, wait a minute. And it's like, oh, well, let me actually talk to you about it. What about AR-15? Like, no, that's not really necessary at all. Just like at the time, there was this buttstock that had come out that allowed a semi-automatic become automatic. They were like, I don't think that's, and it was so, they were not hard conversations. There was never really a point that we were arguing, as long as I wasn't trying to
put something on them.
But the branding of it, I can comfortably talk to people about abortion, which is a hot topic, obviously. But if I don't attribute your pro-choice or pro-life, and we just have a dialogue, and I remove the branding narratives, you can have a pretty reasonable, not everyone, you know, I don't want to sound like everyone is, but you can have pretty reasonable conversations
with most people.
With most people that are not aligned with my political views.
Yeah, there's a lot more common ground there than people think.
There's easily common ground. I'm like, so, you know, this 10-year-old that got pregnant, I'd be like, so you believe that 10-year-old should bring a child to term? And they'd be like, no. And then I'm like, oh, so you are pro-choice. But if I say you're pro-choice, you're gonna be like, no, I'm pro-life.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, let's remove the branding and let's talk about the scenarios, the situations. And in that I found more common ground. So for me, because I'm an outsider in this state, it has been pretty rich, fertile ground for me to be like, oh, here's perspectives I don't know. What can I write to like bring more empathy and understanding for myself, but also, you know, for people who watch the films.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think that's a beautiful way to end the conversation, Robert. It was great talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And hopefully we can talk to you about your next movie. Thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.